we go on to people who are already working in a helping capacity with other human beings. Let's say you're a psychotherapist, counselor, social worker, body worker, nurse, doctor, and so on. All these, in these professions, you will, in many of them, you have a certain way of interacting. There's a certain structure that you use that is helpful when you work with people. Even if you're, certainly a doctor has a very certain structure, all his knowledge, she applies all this knowledge to. A nurse also is highly trained, a certain structure, you have to do this, this, and this. A psychotherapist probably has been trained in a certain school of psychotherapy, and she applies whatever technique they have learned as part of their training, and applies that, hoping that it will be helpful, and it is necessary and helpful. But as presence arises in your life, you may find that, or you will find that an additional dimension comes into the way in which you practice your profession with other people. A different dimension, an additional dimension comes in. And that is the dimension of presence. Then you're not only, let's say, you're not only a nurse, you're also a teacher of presence as you go about your profession. You're not only a psychoanalyst, say, you're also a teacher of presence. So what is that shift? Just as an example, you may be, let's say you are a psychoanalyst or psychotherapist. Psychoanalyst, strictly speaking, is a Freudian therapist, but yes. And so you listen, as a therapist, you listen. In some schools, in many schools of therapy, you also give advice, you ask questions, you listen, you may give advice. And as you practice, at some point, and as presence begins to arise in you, you may notice that there is a certain power that arises when you listen to a patient or client. In some schools of therapy, they're called clients. When, as you begin to realize that an energy field arises, one could say, between you and your client or patient. As you sit there and listen, presence arises. Hard to describe in words what that is. A powerful field of stillness. And then you may find that the words that arise, we're still talking about therapists as an example, the words that arise may go beyond what you have learned in your training. And so you made just the right question at the right moment. Asking questions is often more powerful than giving answers. Or maybe some answer will come through you, or the patient or client suddenly comes to a realization, oh my God. And it arises out of that field of presence that is there between you. So you go beyond the technique that you have learned. It doesn't mean that you necessarily discard the technique. In some professions, you certainly need to still use let's say, your body worker. Certainly, you continue to apply your technique, but you begin to realize again at some point, as you are with that person, perhaps silently doing whatever it is that you do to help on a physical level, and you realize there's suddenly a power arises that transcends what you do as part of your technique, what you do physically. And then you may also intuitively do something that otherwise you would not have done. A massage therapist, every massage therapist usually has a school, is trained in one particular school of massage. But as you practice more and more, you may find intuition begins to play a bigger role than the learned technique. And then you become a much more powerful therapist when intuition takes over. You may need the technique perhaps for several years in many cases, and then the additional element comes in, and that is presence. So then you're not only a massage therapist, you're also a teacher of presence. Even if you don't say anything, the energy field of presence becomes an important part of your work. And sometimes it's possible that it manifests as words, that you may say something that this person needs to hear at that moment. Intuitively, the words suddenly come to you. So the same thing applies. Let's say another example. Let's say you're a social worker, or you are. Let's say you work with people in difficult situations, and again, you're not just. You're no longer just applying what you have learned. You may still be applying it, but there's more suddenly to the interaction. Let's say the person comes in, let's say you're a social worker, and she explains the situation and is in distress. And you look at this person, you listen, and you're no longer there as a social worker. You're there as a powerful point of presence. And that is how presence flows into what you do. You become a teacher of presence without ceasing to be a social worker. So some nurses are already, without actually knowing it, some nurses are already, even if they have no knowledge of, may not have read any spiritual books, some of them are already becoming a teacher of presence, and they don't even know it. Not all nurses. I was in hospital twice in recent times. So the first time in my life, in my old age, I had to go to hospital twice for operations. And I noticed that some nurses are they're stressed and they just really don't want to deal with, but they do their work, or it's okay, but and then there are others who bring an enormous sense of attention to you when they ask questions. They're attentive and helpful. There's more. They don't just perform their duty, their job. There's something additional that has come in. They honor every person, give them attention. They already, without knowing it, they already teach us of presence, without knowing it, or they may know it. And this can happen in many professions, that helping professions. This sometimes happens after several years of practicing your profession. This additional element of presence comes in. And those people, those in helping professions, who become a teacher of presence, whether they know it or not, they are the best in what they do. They become masters in what they do. They're absolute masters. So that's the presence, becoming a teacher of presence through your profession. And this is something that also, if you learn, you can learn more about that, of how to accelerate this process so that presence arises without you having to work for 10 years, and then finally you transcend and the additional dimension comes in, so that you can make it more conscious, so that presence can arise in your professional life, working with other human beings, without having to wait 10 years, and even then it may not happen. In many of them, it does not. In fact, many people in the helping professions, as you may know, they burn out, as the expression goes. They, after years of working, they just can't take anymore, and they become stressed and sometimes despondent. That's a pity. It doesn't have to be like that. So that's something that's very important to learn for anybody in the helping profession, to bring in this additional dimension, the dimension of the timeless depth, the depth dimension. So you're showing whoever you work with, ultimately you give them a glimpse of who they are in their essence. You don't just work on the level of personality. And that is a sign that the teaching of presence is happening. You're no longer just operating on the level of personality or on the level of your particular function. So you're not, the function would be, there's a doctor and there's a patient. So those are the two conceptual identities of functions. And many doctors, they see you as a patient, or perhaps not even that, because they're so busy, they may only see the particular thing that's wrong in your body. They see this one problem that needs to be addressed. So at best, you're a patient, but they don't see the human. When presence has not arisen, they do not really relate to you as a human being. They relate to the human, but not to the being. At best, without the arising of presence, they relate to the human of you, which is the person. And then you're lucky if they do, but they may only relate to your particular physical dysfunction. But some doctors, as presence arises, even if they don't spend a lot of time with you, they're really there for you. They really give you attention to the totality of who you are, not just the illness, but the totality of who you are. They acknowledge the being of you. And so they've become teachers of presence. They may never talk about presence. To be a teacher of presence on that level, you never need to talk about, maybe you do, but you don't. There's no need to talk about presence. You become a teacher of presence through embodying presence. So that's being a teacher of presence through your helping profession.